Christmas has always been a cherished tradition in our family, a time when warmth, laughter, and the smell of holiday food filled the air. For as long as I can remember, the holiday season was about gathering everyone around a festive table, creating moments that lingered in our hearts well beyond the year's end. For me, now 34 years old, Christmas holds an even deeper significance. As a mother of two young children, ages 7 and 4, I strive to make every holiday magical for them. It's not just about presents or decorations, but the shared experience of being surrounded by love and family. Together with my husband, we've worked hard to carry on the traditions that meant so much to us growing up, ensuring our kids feel the joy and security of these special times. But in recent years, Christmas has become more complicated. Like many families, ours has its share of challenges, unspoken tensions, and emotional wounds that surface when everyone comes together. Among those challenges is my relationship with my mom. At 65, she's a woman of strong opinions and an even stronger presence, traits that have often led to conflict. Despite her struggles with alcohol over the years, we've always tried to include her, believing in the power of second chances and the importance of family unity. Yet, the memories of those gatherings have become increasingly mixed. This story begins with the anticipation of Christmas, the decorations going up, and the excitement in the kids' voices as they count down the days. But this year feels different. For the first time, I find myself questioning what's best, not just for tradition's sake, but for the well-being of my own little family. Last year's Christmas dinner began like so many others before it. The house was filled with the aromas of a lovingly prepared meal. The kids were buzzing with excitement over their presents, and the holiday music created an atmosphere of cheer. My husband and I had gone to great lengths to create the perfect day, hoping to make it memorable for everyone. When my mom arrived, she brought with her an energy that was hard to ignore. She walked in holding several bottles of wine, despite the fact that everyone knew she had been in treatment for alcohol addiction. At first, I tried not to let it bother me. Maybe she'd brought the wine as a gesture for others to enjoy and wouldn't indulge herself. Maybe this year would be different. Initially, things were fine. My mom was chatty, perhaps a little too much, but she seemed happy. She complimented the decorations, teased the kids in a playful way, and shared stories from her younger days that always made the room light up. For a brief moment, I thought my worries might have been unfounded. But halfway through dinner, the tone shifted. My mom turned her attention to my husband, her words sharper than I'd anticipated. She questioned his career, mocking his job and suggesting it wasn't good enough for someone like me. The laughter that had once filled the room was replaced by an awkward silence. I tried to steer the conversation back to something lighter, hoping to diffuse the tension, but it was as though she couldn't stop. Her comments became more pointed, and soon I was in her line of fire. She accused me of being a disappointment as a daughter, saying I hadn't lived up to her expectations. As her voice rose, I glanced at my kids, who were watching wide-eyed, clearly unsettled by what they were witnessing. The perfect Christmas I had envisioned was crumbling before my eyes, and I realized that something had to give. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable, like a sudden chill sweeping through the room. My mom, once lively and engaging, was now becoming louder and more combative with each passing moment. My husband sat across the table, his jaw tightening as he tried to remain calm. I could see the frustration in his eyes, but he was holding back. For my sake, for the kids, for the holiday. Her comments about his job were relentless. She called it a waste of potential and questioned his ability to provide for our family. The words stung, not just because they were directed at him, but because they undermined the life we had built together. I wanted to speak up, to defend him, but every time I opened my mouth, she would cut me off, her tone growing more dismissive. It was as if the dinner table had turned into a stage, with her performance meant to belittle and provoke. When I finally managed to interject, asking her to stop, she turned her attention to me. The criticism came fast and sharp. She called me ungrateful, a failure as a daughter, and implied that I had let her down in ways I couldn't even comprehend. I could feel the heat rising in my face, a mix of anger and humiliation. But what hurt most was seeing my kids caught in the crossfire. My 7-year-old kept looking at me, confused and unsure whether he should say something or stay quiet. My 4-year-old simply stared, her tiny hands gripping the edge of the table. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about me or my mom. This was about the environment I was exposing my children to, the memories they were forming about what family gatherings should be. I knew that if I didn't act, the damage would linger far beyond that evening. I looked at my husband, silently pleading for his support, and he gave a small nod. Together, we decided that enough was enough. The peace and joy of Christmas weren't worth sacrificing to keep the illusion of family harmony intact. The humiliation settled in like a heavy weight as my mom's words echoed through the room. It wasn't just the sting of her insults. It was the fact that they were laid bare for everyone to witness. My husband, my children, and even the few extended family members who had joined us were all there, caught in the uncomfortable spectacle. I could feel every pair of eyes darting between her and me, some wide with shock, others deliberately avoiding the scene. My sister, sitting at the other end of the table, looked torn between intervening and staying silent, clearly hoping the situation would resolve itself. But the damage had already been done. Her comments about my role as a daughter cut deeper than I expected. She listed grievances from years past, painting me as ungrateful and selfish. It was as though she had stored up every perceived slight, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash them in front of an audience. I felt exposed in a way I never had before, as if the walls I had carefully built to protect my sense of self-worth were crumbling. Worse, my kids were witnessing it all, absorbing every word, every raised voice. My 7-year-old shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while my 4-year-old clung to her fork as though it were a shield. I tried to hold on to my composure, to respond calmly, but the lump in my throat made speaking impossible. Any attempt to defend myself would only escalate the situation further. It was in that moment, staring at the shocked faces around me and feeling my children's unease, that I understood something crucial. Preserving peace at all costs wasn't just harming me. It was harming my family. Something had to change. Starting now. The decision to ask my mom to leave wasn't made lightly, but it felt unavoidable. As her tirade continued, the festive atmosphere we had worked so hard to create was unraveling by the second. The tension was suffocating, and I could see the discomfort etched on everyone's faces. My husband leaned toward me, his voice low but steady. "I think it's time," he said, his eyes full of quiet support. I nodded, knowing he was right. With a deep breath, I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me, and walked over to where my mom was seated. "Mom," I began, my voice as calm as I could manage despite the storm raging inside me. "I think it's best if you leave." The room went silent. My mom froze for a moment, as if the words hadn't registered. Then, she scoffed loudly, her expression shifting from disbelief to indignation. "Leave? On Christmas? Are you serious?" she exclaimed, her voice rising. I stayed firm, even as my heart pounded. "This isn't working. You're upsetting everyone, and I can't let this continue." Her reaction was explosive. She accused me of being disrespectful, ungrateful, and cold-hearted. Her voice cracked as she stood up, knocking her chair back, and grabbed her coat with exaggerated movements. "I hope you're happy," she spat, glaring at me. "You've ruined Christmas for everyone." As the door closed behind her, I felt a mix of relief and heartache. The room was eerily quiet, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts. My kids stared at me with wide eyes, their confusion evident. My sister shook her head, muttering under her breath, while my husband placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. I had done what needed to be done, but the damage lingered, leaving an ache that I knew wouldn't fade easily. The aftermath of that night was as messy as the dinner itself. Once the door slammed shut behind my mom, the silence in the house was deafening. Everyone was processing what had just happened in their own way. My 7-year-old asked, "Is Grandma mad at us?" While my 4-year-old clung to me, too young to articulate her feelings but clearly sensing the tension. I tried to offer some kind of explanation, something simple enough for my kids to understand. "Grandma needed to go home because she wasn't feeling well," I said, though I knew it wasn't the full truth. My husband helped usher them into the living room, distracting them with a movie to restore some normalcy. The adults, however, weren't as easy to distract. My sister was livid. She didn't waste a moment before letting me know how she felt. "You didn't have to throw her out like that," she said, her voice sharp and accusatory. "She's your mother. She was just upset. You should have calmed her down." I was too exhausted to argue. "I tried," I replied, my voice quieter than hers but no less firm. "But I won't let her ruin another Christmas like this. It's not fair to my kids or to us." Her expression made it clear that she didn't agree. She left shortly after, barely saying goodbye, and I knew this incident had deepened the divide between us. In the days that followed, the fallout spread through the rest of the family. My mom called several relatives, telling them her version of the story, painting herself as the victim of a cruel and heartless daughter. Some reached out to express their disapproval of my actions, while others stayed silent, unsure of how to respond. The guilt weighed on me heavily. I kept replaying the night in my head, wondering if I could have handled it differently, if I could have avoided the scene altogether. Yet, deep down, I knew that standing up for my family's peace was necessary, even if it meant facing judgment from those who didn't understand. As the holiday season approached again, the memories of last year's Christmas were still fresh in my mind. The thought of going through another night like that filled me with dread. I wanted this year to be different, calmer, happier, and free from the lingering tension that had overshadowed our previous celebration. My husband and I sat down to talk about it one evening after the kids had gone to bed. "What are we going to do about your mom?" he asked, his tone careful but direct. I hesitated, unsure of how to put my thoughts into words. "I don't think I can invite her this year," I finally said. "I just can't risk another scene like last time." He nodded slowly, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "I agree," he said. "It's not fair to the kids, or to you. But you know your family isn't going to take this well." I did know. My sister's anger from last year hadn't subsided, and I could already hear the accusations that would come if I excluded my mom from Christmas dinner. But as much as I hated the idea of upsetting anyone, I couldn't ignore what was at stake. For days, I wrestled with the decision. I considered inviting her under strict conditions, no alcohol, no criticisms, but deep down, I knew I couldn't enforce those boundaries. My mom had a way of pushing limits, of turning apologies into justifications, and I didn't have the energy to police her behavior during a time that was supposed to be joyful. Ultimately, I decided that protecting my family's peace had to come first. It wasn't an easy choice, and it certainly wasn't one I made lightly, but the alternative felt impossible. When I told my husband my decision, he supported me wholeheartedly. "We'll handle whatever comes," he said, squeezing my hand. I wished I shared his confidence. In the back of my mind, I knew the fallout was inevitable. Still, I resolved to stick to my choice, hoping it was the right one for everyone who mattered most. The moment I shared my decision with my sister, the backlash came swiftly and harshly. She didn't wait for me to explain my reasoning fully before cutting in, her voice brimming with disbelief. "You're really not inviting Mom to Christmas?" she said, the words hanging heavy in the air. "Do you even realize what you're doing? She's going to be alone, on Christmas." I had anticipated this response, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. "I know how it sounds," I replied, trying to keep my tone measured. "But after what happened last year, I just can't take the risk again. The kids shouldn't have to deal with that, and neither should we." She scoffed. "She's our mother, and she's been through a lot. Everyone makes mistakes. You're just punishing her because she embarrassed you. That's not fair." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit, but I held my ground. "It's not about punishing her," I said firmly. "It's about protecting my family. I'm not saying I don't love her, but I have to prioritize what's best for us." She wasn't convinced. "You're being cruel, plain and simple. If Dad were here, he'd never let you do this." That comment hit a nerve. Our father had passed years ago, and his absence always felt more acute during the holidays. I knew my sister was trying to guilt me, but invoking his name felt like crossing a line. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said quietly. unwilling to escalate the argument further. The conversation ended abruptly, and I knew our relationship had taken another hit. As much as it pained me, I couldn't let her disapproval sway my decision. The boundaries I had set were too important to compromise. After the tense exchange with my sister, I found myself needing reassurance. My husband had been my rock throughout this ordeal, offering quiet support and understanding when I doubted myself. That evening, as we sat together in the living room, I opened up about how her words had shaken me. "She thinks I'm being cruel," I said, staring into my mug of tea. "And maybe she's right. What kind of daughter leaves her mom alone on Christmas?" He reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. "You're not being cruel," he said gently. "You're protecting our family. Last year was awful. For you, for me, for the kids. Do you really want to put us through that again?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "Of course not. But it still feels wrong, like I'm giving up on her." "You're not giving up on her," he said firmly. "You've tried over and over. But at some point, you have to ask yourself, is it worth the cost? You deserve a peaceful Christmas, and so do the kids. That doesn't make you a bad daughter. It makes you a good mom." His words struck a chord. He wasn't just thinking about himself or even our kids. He was thinking about me, my emotional well-being, and how much I had already sacrificed to keep the peace. "You're not alone in this," he continued. "Whatever happens with your family, we'll face it together. But you don't have to feel guilty for setting boundaries. It's okay to take care of yourself." I leaned into him, grateful for his unwavering support. In that moment, I felt a little less burdened, a little more certain that I was making the right choice, not just for my family, but for myself. As Christmas drew closer, the division within my family became more pronounced. News of my decision not to invite my mom had spread quickly, and opinions were flying in from every direction. Some relatives reached out to offer support, while others made it clear they disapproved. My sister, as expected, had been vocal in her discontent, calling me selfish and cold. She wasn't alone in her judgment. A couple of my aunts chimed in, suggesting I should reconsider for the sake of keeping the family together. They argued that my mom's struggles with alcohol and her behavior last year shouldn't define her entirely, that she deserved another chance. But for every criticism, there was also quiet understanding. A few cousins who had their own complicated relationships with her reached out privately to share their support. "You have to do what's best for your kids," one of them said, a sentiment that gave me a glimmer of reassurance. The family group chat, however, was a different story. Comments ranged from subtle digs about the importance of forgiveness to outright declarations that I was being too harsh. Every message felt like a new layer of pressure, a reminder that the weight of family expectations was squarely on my shoulders. My husband encouraged me to step back from the constant barrage of opinions. "You don't have to defend yourself to everyone," he said. "They don't know what it's like to be in your position." He was right, of course, but the judgment still stung. I found myself replaying last year's dinner in my mind, searching for signs that I might be overreacting. Was I too rigid? Too unwilling to forgive? The division extended beyond words. It showed in actions. My sister decided to host her own Christmas dinner, inviting my mom along with other family members who sided with her. While she didn't explicitly say so, the move felt like a statement, one that deepened the growing rift. The holidays were supposed to bring families closer, but this year, they seemed to be pulling ours apart. Still, I held on to the belief that my choice, though difficult, was ultimately the right one. As the holiday season unfolded, I found myself increasingly worried about how my decision would affect my kids. At 7 and 4, they were too young to fully grasp the complexities of adult relationships, but they weren't oblivious to the tension. My 7-year-old in particular was perceptive. "Why isn't Grandma coming for Christmas?" he asked one evening as we decorated the tree. His voice was curious but cautious, as though he sensed the subject was a delicate one. I paused, searching for the right words. "Grandma won't be joining us this year because sometimes grown-ups need time to work on things," I said, keeping my tone gentle. "It's not because we don't love her. We do. but it's important for everyone to have a peaceful Christmas." He seemed to mull this over, nodding slowly. "So, like a timeout?" he asked, his childlike logic breaking the tension. I smiled despite myself. "Kind of, yes," I replied. "But it's more about making sure everyone can enjoy the holiday without any stress." My 4-year-old, meanwhile, didn't ask many questions. She seemed content with the excitement of Christmas itself, presents, cookies, and stories before bed. Still, I worried about how much she had absorbed from last year's dinner. Kids are more intuitive than we often give them credit for. They pick up on tones, expressions, and the subtle shifts in energy that adults might overlook. Last year, they had both witnessed their grandmother's outburst and my emotional reaction to it. I wondered how much of that memory lingered for them, shaping their expectations for this year. My husband and I made a conscious effort to keep the focus on positivity, filling our days with holiday crafts, baking, and fun traditions. Still, I couldn't shake the pang of guilt. While I believed I was protecting them from further conflict, I also worried about what they might lose by not having their grandmother around this year. The balance between shielding my children and preserving family ties felt impossibly fragile. All I could do was hope that the choices I was making now would benefit them in the long run. The decision to exclude my mom from Christmas this year forced me to confront a topic I had avoided for most of my adult life: boundaries. Growing up, I was taught that family always comes first, no matter the circumstances. Disagreements were to be brushed aside, sacrifices made, and grievances ignored, all for the sake of unity. But as I got older, especially after becoming a mother myself, I began to see how damaging that mindset could be. Sacrificing my own peace and well-being for the sake of keeping the family together was a lesson I had learned too well. Last Christmas had made it painfully clear that my tendency to avoid confrontation wasn't just affecting me anymore. It was spilling over into the lives of my children and my husband. Setting boundaries with my mom wasn't easy. She had always been a force of nature in our family, someone whose moods dictated the atmosphere of any gathering. Growing up, I learned to accommodate her feelings, even when it meant suppressing my own. But as an adult, I started to realize that constantly walking on eggshells around her wasn't sustainable, especially if it meant exposing my kids to the same unhealthy dynamics. Last year's Christmas was a wake-up call. It showed me the toll her behavior could take on everyone around her, and it became clear that things needed to change. Boundaries weren't about shutting her out or punishing her. They were about creating a safe space for my family to thrive. This Christmas, I chose to prioritize that space, even if it meant facing judgment from others. It wasn't an easy choice, but I reminded myself that boundaries are an act of love, for myself, for my kids, and even for my mom. Without them, relationships could only deteriorate further. Understanding my mom's struggles with alcohol was a crucial part of this story, even if it didn't make the decisions any easier. Her relationship with drinking had been a shadow over our family for as long as I could remember. It wasn't constant. There were stretches where she seemed in control, attending meetings and avoiding temptation. But then there were the relapses, the periods where everything unraveled. Growing up, I learned to recognize the signs early: the slight slur in her speech, the overly animated gestures, or the sudden shifts in mood. All subtle cues that meant we were heading for trouble. As a kid, I didn't fully understand what was happening. I just knew there were moments when my mom didn't feel like my mom. As an adult, I've tried to approach her struggles with compassion. Addiction is a disease, not a moral failing, and I've seen firsthand how much it has cost her. She's lost friendships, damaged relationships within the family, and sacrificed opportunities because of her inability to stay sober. When she began treatment, I genuinely hoped it would mark a turning point. But last Christmas showed me how tenuous that progress was. Bringing wine to the dinner, knowing she was in recovery, felt like a betrayal, not just of herself, but of the trust we'd placed in her. Her behavior that night wasn't just about the alcohol. It was about the unresolved pain and anger she carried with her, spilling out at the worst possible moment. I don't believe my mom is a bad person. I believe she's someone who is deeply flawed and struggling with demons she hasn't fully confronted. But understanding that doesn't erase the impact her actions have had on me and my family. This year, I had to make a choice. I could continue hoping for change and exposing my family to potential harm, or I could step back and prioritize our well-being. It wasn't a lack of love that led to my decision. It was the recognition that love alone couldn't fix what she was going through. She needed help, and I couldn't give it to her at the expense of my family. Balancing compassion for my mom with the need to protect my family has been one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. On one hand, she's my mother, the woman who raised me, who taught me to ride a bike, who wiped away my tears when I skinned my knees. On the other hand, she's also the person who, through her struggles and choices, has caused some of the deepest pain I've experienced. Compassion has always been my default. I've spent years excusing her behavior, rationalizing her outbursts, and forgiving her for the hurtful things she's said and done. She's struggling, I'd tell myself. She doesn't mean it. And to a certain extent, that was true. Her addiction and unresolved issues often dictated her actions more than her true self did. But there's a fine line between compassion and enabling, and last Christmas showed me how often I'd crossed it. By allowing her behavior to go unchecked, I wasn't just letting her hurt me. I was exposing my husband and kids to the fallout. That realization hit hard. I wanted to believe that by being patient and forgiving, I could help her heal. But the truth is, no amount of compassion on my part could fix what she was going through. Protecting my family wasn't an act of cruelty. It was a necessary step to create a healthy environment for the people I love most. That didn't mean I stopped caring about her. I still hoped for her recovery, still wished for a future where she could be the mom and grandmother I knew she wanted to be. But I also understood that until she was ready to face her issues and truly commit to change, I had to draw the line. It was a painful choice, filled with guilt and second-guessing, but it was one I had to make. Compassion without boundaries wasn't enough to keep my family safe, and I owed it to myself, and to them, to prioritize our well-being. The love I felt for my mom didn't diminish because of my decision. It simply took a different shape, one rooted in tough but necessary choices. The tension with my sister reached a boiling point as Christmas drew nearer. She called me one evening, her tone sharp from the start. "I've been thinking," she began, skipping any pleasantries, "and I really think you should reconsider. Mom shouldn't have to spend Christmas alone." I braced myself. "I get where you're coming from," I replied cautiously. "But this isn't just about her. I need to make sure this Christmas is peaceful for my family." Her sigh was heavy, filled with frustration. "You're punishing her for one bad night," she said. "Do you even know how much that's going to hurt her? She already feels like she's lost so much." "I'm not punishing her," I said firmly. "I'm trying to avoid a repeat of last year. You saw what happened. It wasn't just a bad night. It was a disaster." "But she's been trying," my sister argued. "She's in treatment, she's apologetic. Doesn't that count for anything?" Of course it counted. I wasn't blind to the effort my mom had put into her recovery. But effort alone wasn't enough to erase the damage that had been done, or to guarantee it wouldn't happen again. "She needs to show that she can respect boundaries and not disrupt the holiday," I explained. "And I don't think we're there yet." My sister didn't hide her disappointment. "Fine," she said bitterly. "But don't expect me to agree with you. I'm still inviting her to my dinner, and you're welcome to join us, if you can manage to be in the same room as her." Her words stung, but I let them hang in the air. The invitation, though delivered with a side of judgment, felt like a small concession. Still, I knew attending her dinner would only complicate things further. "Thanks, but I think we'll stick to our plans," I said quietly, ending the conversation on as neutral a note as I could manage. The rift between us felt wider than ever, but I had made my choice, and I was prepared to stand by it. As much as I had tried to focus on what was best for my family, I couldn't help but wonder how my mom was feeling about everything. I hadn't spoken to her directly since making the decision not to invite her to Christmas dinner. Most of what I knew came through my sister or the grapevine of extended family, and each version painted a slightly different picture. According to my sister, my mom felt abandoned, hurt, and even a little betrayed. "She doesn't understand why you're being so harsh," my sister had said during one of our many tense conversations. She thinks you're holding last year against her when she's trying to do better. I could imagine my mom's perspective all too well. She probably saw this as a rejection, a sign that I didn't believe she was capable of change. I pictured her sitting at home, replaying the events of last Christmas, rationalizing her actions, and convincing herself that I had overreacted. At the same time, I knew my mom well enough to suspect there was more to her feelings than just sadness. She had a way of turning hurt into anger, of framing herself as the victim in a way that absolved her of accountability. I could almost hear her voice saying, "After everything I've done for her, this is how she repays me?" But deep down, I hoped she understood. I hoped she could see that my decision wasn't about punishing her, but about protecting my family from further harm. I wanted to believe that she recognized the impact her actions had on others, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. I wasn't sure if she would use this as a wake-up call to work harder on her recovery, or if it would push her further into resentment. Either way, I knew I couldn't control her reaction. All I could do was hope that, with time, she might come to see this as an opportunity to reflect and heal, rather than another fracture in an already fragile relationship. Feeling overwhelmed by the family conflict, I turned to outside perspectives to help make sense of the situation. I confided in a close friend, someone who knew my family's dynamics well enough to understand, but wasn't so close that they'd feel obligated to take sides. "You're not wrong for setting boundaries," she told me after listening patiently. "Your mom's behavior has been a pattern for years, and you've done everything you could to accommodate her. At some point, it's okay to say, 'Enough.'" Her reassurance helped, but I still felt unsettled. I needed more input, so I turned to an online advice forum, one I had relied on occasionally when navigating tricky situations. I posted a detailed account of what had happened last year and my reasons for not inviting my mom this year. The responses were overwhelmingly supportive, though a few people pushed back. Many echoed my friend's sentiment. "You're protecting your family, and that's what matters most." Others shared their own stories of setting boundaries with difficult relatives, making me feel less alone in my struggle. Still, there were a few who questioned whether I was being too harsh. "Christmas is about family and forgiveness," one person wrote. "Couldn't you try again with some ground rules in place?" Their comments made me pause, but ultimately I knew those ground rules wouldn't work unless my mom was willing to respect them, and last year had proven otherwise. The advice I received helped clarify my feelings. It reminded me that it wasn't wrong to value my family's peace over tradition, nor was it cruel to prioritize my kids' emotional well-being. While not everyone agreed with my choice, the support I received gave me the strength to trust my instincts and move forward with confidence. Despite the support I'd received from friends and strangers alike, guilt still lingered, gnawing at me in quiet moments. Was I being too harsh? Too unwilling to forgive? The thought of my mom spending Christmas alone made my heart ache, even though I believed I was making the right choice. The guilt came in waves, often sparked by small reminders. I'd see holiday ads featuring big, happy families, or hear songs about togetherness and wonder if I was robbing my kids of something important. After all, wasn't Christmas supposed to be about giving people second chances? About love and forgiveness? Doubt crept in at night when the house was quiet, and I had nothing to distract me from my thoughts. What if my mom really was trying? What if excluding her only pushed her further away, making her feel even less inclined to change? I replayed conversations with my sister in my head, her accusations hitting harder in retrospect. At the same time, I couldn't forget the hurt from last year. The image of my kids sitting silently at the dinner table, their joy replaced by confusion and discomfort, was seared into my memory. Protecting them wasn't just a choice. It felt like an obligation. My husband noticed the weight I was carrying. One evening, as I was lost in thought, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're allowed to feel guilty," he said softly. "It's a tough decision, but just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong." His words helped, but the doubt didn't disappear entirely. I reminded myself that guilt is often a side effect of doing something necessary, but uncomfortable. Setting boundaries was new for me, and breaking old habits, especially ones tied to family, was bound to feel like this. As Christmas drew nearer, I resolved to focus on what mattered most: creating a happy, peaceful holiday for my kids and husband. Even with the guilt and doubt, I knew deep down that I was acting out of love, not just for my family, but for myself as well. Throughout this ordeal, my husband's perspective remained a steadying force, offering clarity when my emotions clouded my judgment. While he didn't say much initially, I could tell he had strong feelings about my mom's behavior and the impact it had on our family. "I don't think you realize how much last Christmas affected the kids," he said one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner. "Our oldest still brings it up sometimes. Not directly, but in little ways. He's already worried about what Christmas will be like this year." Hearing that broke my heart. I had been so focused on managing my mom's actions that I hadn't fully considered how deeply the events of that night had resonated with my children. My husband continued, his tone gentle but firm. "I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I just think it's important to remember why you're making this decision. It's not about punishing your mom. It's about protecting our kids from another night like that." He was right, of course, and his perspective helped ground me. While I was wrapped up in guilt over my mom's feelings, he was focused on what was best for our immediate family. "I know it's hard," he added, "but sometimes doing the right thing feels wrong. That doesn't mean it isn't right." We talked about the boundaries we wanted to set not just for this Christmas, but for the future as well. He reminded me that it wasn't selfish to prioritize peace and stability in our home, especially during the holidays. "Our job is to make sure our kids feel safe and happy," he said. "That's the most important thing." His unwavering support gave me the strength to stick to my decision, even as I faced criticism from other family members. Knowing he was by my side, fully understanding the stakes and the sacrifices involved, made me feel less alone. His perspective wasn't just reassuring, it was a reminder of what really mattered in the midst of all the chaos. The tension with my sister finally came to a head in the days leading up to Christmas. After weeks of strained conversations and passive-aggressive comments, I decided it was time to address things directly. "Can we talk?" I asked when she answered my call. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, but she agreed. "I know you're upset with me," I began, trying to keep my tone calm and neutral. "And I want to understand where you're coming from, but I also need you to understand my side." She didn't hold back. "It just feels like you're giving up on Mom," she said. "She's trying, and you're shutting her out. I don't think that's fair." I took a deep breath before responding. "I'm not giving up on her," I said. "I'm giving her the space to work on herself without putting my family in a situation where things could go wrong again. Last year wasn't just hard on me. It was hard on everyone, including my kids." Her voice softened slightly, but she still sounded unconvinced. "I get that. But Christmas is supposed to be about forgiveness. Can't you give her another chance?" "I want to," I admitted. "But forgiveness doesn't mean ignoring the patterns we've seen. It's not just one bad night. It's years of dealing with this. I have to think about what's best for my family. And right now, that means setting some boundaries." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I guess I just see it differently," she said quietly. "But I'll try to respect your decision." It wasn't the resolution I'd hoped for, but it felt like a small step forward. Even if we didn't fully agree, I was grateful that she was willing to meet me halfway, however reluctantly. While the tension with my sister was starting to ease, the rest of the family proved to be a different challenge altogether. News of my decision had spread, and everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some family members were supportive, though their approval was often quiet and private. A cousin messaged me one evening saying, "You're brave for doing this. I know it's not easy, but you have to put your family first." Messages like that felt like small lifelines, moments of validation in a sea of judgment. Others, however, were far less understanding. My aunt, who had always been close to my mom, called me out of the blue, her voice dripping with disapproval. "I heard you're not inviting your mother to Christmas," she said, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. "Do you realize how heartless that sounds?" I tried to explain my reasoning, emphasizing the events of last year and my concerns for my kids, but she wasn't interested in hearing it. "You only get one mother," she said sharply, "and trust me, you'll regret this one day." The guilt her words stirred was immediate and heavy, but I reminded myself that she hadn't been there last Christmas. She hadn't seen the damage firsthand or the emotional toll it had taken on my family. What struck me most, though, was how divided the family had become over this issue. There were those who sided with me, those who sided with my mom, and those who stayed silent, unsure of where to stand. It felt like every conversation, every interaction, was tinged with the weight of the decision I'd made. Despite the criticism, I knew I couldn't let their opinions sway me. The people who truly mattered, my husband, my kids, and even my sister in her own way, were the ones I had to focus on. The rest of the family could have their opinions, but they weren't the ones living with the consequences. The holidays had always been a time for connection, but this year they felt more like a test of resilience, boundaries, and the strength of my convictions. With the decision made and as much peace as possible established within the family, my husband and I turned our attention to creating a memorable Christmas for our children. We wanted this year to be filled with joy, warmth, and the kind of magic that makes the holiday season special. We started new traditions, ones that we hoped would become lasting memories. Together with the kids, we baked cookies shaped like stars and snowmen, the kitchen filling with the sweet scent of cinnamon and sugar. Laughter echoed through the house as flour ended up on noses, and little hands sneaked tastes of the dough. Decorating the house became a family affair. We strung lights around the windows, their soft glow bringing a cozy ambiance to the chilly evenings. The kids helped hang ornaments on the tree, each one carrying a story or a memory. My husband lifted our 4-year-old so she could place the star on top, her eyes shining with excitement. We also decided to focus on the spirit of giving. As a family, we picked out toys to donate to a local charity, explaining to the kids the importance of helping those less fortunate. They embraced the idea wholeheartedly, choosing items they thought other children would love. In the evenings, we gathered by the fireplace to read classic Christmas stories. The kids snuggled under warm blankets, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames as they listened intently. It was in these quiet moments that I felt a profound sense of peace, the kind that had been missing in previous years. My husband and I made a conscious effort to keep the atmosphere light and joyful. We avoided discussions about family tensions, focusing instead on the happiness right in front of us. The absence of underlying stress was noticeable, and it allowed us all to fully immerse ourselves in the holiday spirit. As Christmas Day approached, I felt a mix of contentment and relief. While the situation with my mom and sister was unresolved, I knew that for now, we were doing what was best for our family. The preparations had brought us closer, and I was grateful for the newfound sense of harmony in our home. Despite the joy we were cultivating in our home, I couldn't help but occasionally wonder, what if I had invited my mom? What would Christmas look like if I had given her another chance? I imagined her arrival, dressed up for the occasion and carrying gifts for the kids. At first, everything would seem fine. She'd smile, make polite small talk, and maybe even offer to help set the table. I'd breathe a small sigh of relief, thinking this time would be different. But as the evening progressed, the familiar signs might start to appear. Perhaps she'd make a comment, seemingly harmless at first, that hinted at her old criticisms. Or maybe she'd have a glass of wine, despite our requests for an alcohol-free celebration. The tension would begin to rise. My husband would catch my eye from across the room, a silent question hanging in the air. Are we about to relive last year? The kids, perceptive as always, would sense the shift and grow quiet, their earlier excitement replaced by uncertainty. And then, I feared, the cycle would repeat. The comments would escalate, her tone growing sharper as she directed her frustrations at my husband, me, or even my sister, if she were present. The atmosphere would become heavy, the warmth of the day replaced by discomfort and unease. By the end of the night, we'd be left with the emotional aftermath, hurt feelings, lingering tension, and the knowledge that we'd allowed the same pattern to play out yet again. This scenario played in my mind more than I wanted to admit, reinforcing my decision. It wasn't that I didn't want to believe in her ability to change. It was that I knew the risk of exposing my family to another scene like last year was too great. I hated that my mind went there, but it wasn't pessimism. It was realism born from experience. While I wished for a better outcome someday, I knew that for this Christmas, avoiding the potential chaos was the best gift I could give to my family. Peace, after all, was what we truly needed most. As Christmas approached, I found myself fielding more messages and calls from family members questioning my decision. It felt like a test of my resolve, each conversation pulling me in a different direction. The pressure was mounting, but I knew I couldn't afford to waver. One afternoon, I decided to send a message to the family group chat to address everything directly. I had avoided doing this earlier, worried about how it might be received, but the constant whispers and subtle digs had become too much. I typed and retyped the message several times, carefully choosing my words. Finally, I sent it. I want to address the situation with Mom, so there's no confusion. I've made the decision not to invite her to our Christmas celebration this year. This was not an easy choice, and it's one I made after a lot of thought about what's best for my family. I understand that some of you disagree, and I respect your opinions, but I ask that you respect mine as well. Last year was incredibly difficult for all of us, and I feel that we need a calmer, more peaceful holiday this year. This doesn't mean I don't love Mom or hope for her recovery. It just means I need to set boundaries for now. I'm not asking anyone to take sides, but I hope we can all focus on enjoying the holidays in our own ways without judgment or tension. I hit send and immediately felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Would they understand? Or would this only fan the flames? Responses started coming in. Some were supportive, brief but kind messages acknowledging my need to prioritize my family. Others were less so, accusing me of being divisive or overdramatic. Despite the backlash, I felt a sense of clarity. Sending that message wasn't about convincing anyone else. It was about standing firm in my decision and asserting my boundaries. For the first time, I felt like I had drawn a clear line in the sand, one that would protect the peace I was determined to preserve this Christmas. When Christmas Day finally arrived, the house was filled with the kind of calm I hadn't experienced in years. The morning started early, as the kids eagerly rushed to the living room to see if Santa had come. Their squeals of delight as they tore open their presents filled the air, their joy infectious. My husband and I watched them from the couch, coffee in hand, exchanging smiles that spoke of shared relief. We had made it to this day without the usual undercurrent of stress and tension, and it felt like a small victory. After the gifts were unwrapped, we spent the morning building toys, playing games, and indulging in far too many holiday cookies. The absence of conflict or emotional weight was noticeable. The laughter and lightness seemed to take up all the space where anxiety used to linger. Dinner was a smaller affair than in previous years, just the four of us. The kids helped set the table, proud of their contributions, while my husband and I worked together in the kitchen. As we sat down to eat, I took a moment to soak in the scene. My family, happy and relaxed, sharing stories and silly jokes without a single cloud of tension hanging over us. There was a pang of sadness, of course. I couldn't completely ignore the fact that my mom wasn't there. I wondered what she was doing, whether she was thinking of us, and how she might be feeling. But that sadness was tempered by the peace I felt in the moment, a peace that had been missing for far too long. As the evening wound down and we tucked the kids into bed, I reflected on the day. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, free of drama, filled with love, and exactly what we needed this year. In the days following Christmas, the emotions from the holiday lingered like an echo. On one hand, I felt a deep sense of relief. The day had gone better than I'd hoped. Peaceful, joyful, and entirely focused on my immediate family. For the first time in years, I hadn't spent Christmas walking on eggshells, worrying about what might go wrong. But the decision to exclude my mom wasn't without consequences. My sister, true to her word, had hosted her own Christmas dinner and invited my mom. I heard about it through scattered updates from other family members. It was fine, one of my cousins said vaguely when I asked. Nothing like last year, though. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt. Was it possible she'd behaved herself? Could I have risked inviting her after all? But I quickly reminded myself that one calm evening didn't erase the patterns of the past or guarantee a different outcome. My mom didn't reach out after Christmas, and neither did my sister. The silence spoke volumes. It hurt, but it also felt necessary, like a cooling-off period for everyone involved. My extended family was quieter than usual as well, perhaps unsure of how to navigate the new dynamic. Still, I felt confident in my choice. Watching my kids beam with happiness on Christmas Day had validated everything. Their memories of this holiday would be filled with laughter and love, not discomfort or confusion. I knew rebuilding my relationship with my mom would take time, and it wouldn't be easy. But I also knew that for now, I had taken the first step toward creating a healthier dynamic, not just for me, but for my entire family. The aftermath wasn't without its challenges, but the peace it brought was worth every difficult moment. As the holiday season drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on everything this experience had taught me. This Christmas had been unlike any other, not because of grand celebrations or extraordinary moments, but because of the boundaries I had set and the peace they had brought. One of the most profound lessons was the importance of prioritizing well-being over tradition. For years, I had clung to the idea that family gatherings were sacred, even when they came at great emotional cost. This year, I realized that protecting my family's peace and joy didn't make me selfish or cruel. It made me responsible. I also learned that setting boundaries is an act of love, even when it doesn't feel that way in the moment. Excluding my mom wasn't about shutting her out permanently. It was about giving her, and myself, the space to reflect and heal. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're guidelines to ensure relationships remain healthy and respectful. Another important takeaway was the value of unwavering support. My husband's constant encouragement reminded me that I wasn't alone in navigating this difficult decision. His understanding and validation gave me the strength to stay firm, even when guilt and doubt crept in. Finally, I came to appreciate that forgiveness and accountability can coexist. While I still love my mom and hope for her recovery, I've realized that forgiveness doesn't mean tolerating harmful behavior. It's possible to forgive someone while also holding them accountable for their actions and protecting yourself from further harm. Looking ahead, I know there's still work to be done, both in my relationship with my mom and in my journey toward balancing compassion with self-preservation. But for the first time in years, I feel like I've taken a step in the right direction. This Christmas taught me that peace doesn't just happen. It's something you create, sometimes through hard choices and uncomfortable conversations. And as difficult as it was, I'm grateful for the clarity and calm it brought to my family. It wasn't the easiest path, but it was undoubtedly the right one.